So as I sort of alluded to, I started Transcend Coffee 9 years ago, and that was, my formal training is actually law. So I came up to Edmonton in 1996 to go to law school. I was escaping a bad supervisor in Calgary while I was doing my master's in sociology, and wrote the LSAT, got accepted, left my wife in Calgary and came up here and started law school. Finished law school in 99, got called to the bar, and didn't really know what I was getting myself into with law, in all honesty. It's a very paper-heavy industry, and while I enjoyed the client relations side of things, I was doing Aboriginal law, I really didn't enjoy the practice of law. And so in 2003, I got exited, actually summarily exited from my firm when I was on holidays, which is kind of a funny story. But it was, yeah, it was a conflict in terms of client perspective. But I ended up leaving there and doing some consulting as a project manager for the Stoney First Nation. And it was in that time frame that I started to think a little bit more about coffee. And because obviously I had no background in coffee whatsoever. So I started to think about coffee, not so much in terms of the beverage, but in terms of community. Because coffee for me, especially, I spent 11 years in university. And in those 11 years, I grew up in a Scandinavian home. My adoptive parents were Danish, so I drank coffee from when I was probably 12. Not good coffee, but dark coffee, like strong coffee. So coffee had always been a part of my life. But what I found with coffee in university was that it was a community thing. It was a stimulation. It was an incubator for conversation, an incubator for community. And that was really sort of the motivation for me in terms of Transcend Coffee. And so as I worked with the Stoney First Nation, I started to self-educate on coffee. It's the age of the internet, so you can get online and start learning. And I got some training with a company out of Vancouver in terms of how to be a barista. I started to roast coffee at home in a little hot air popcorn popper, and my friends wanted the coffee that I had roasted. And so that was really the genesis for me in terms of coffee. I had no background whatsoever in coffee, and I just sort of dove right in. One of the things that I really wanted to do when I got involved with coffee was quality. And I'll take a step back in terms of the quality story, because it sort of ties into the whole law thing. When I first started law school in '96, one of my friends from University of Lethbridge, I went to University of Lethbridge, then Calgary, and then Edmonton, so I've sort of moved further north as I went along. He in celebration of me becoming a law student, he came up one day with a bottle of Chateau Lafite Rothschild, 1977. So I don't know if any of you are wine people, but that's not a cheap bottle of wine. It's about at that time, it was about a $400, $500 bottle of wine. And he brought that up to drink as celebratory sort of, Paul, congratulations, you're in law school. And knowing now what I know, we never should have drank that bottle in 1996. We should be drinking that now. But we consumed that bottle of wine that night, sitting around my little kitchen table. And at the end of it, I was like, this wine might as well have been a bottle of Baby Duck or Yellowtail, because you paid $400 for this bottle of wine, but I have no idea why. And it was a complete waste. It was wasted, 100% wasted on us. And it was that moment that I decided I was never ever again going to drink something like that without understanding why it was worth $400. I needed to understand what drove quality in that bottle of wine, and I didn't know. And that really became my passion for the next 5-6 years. I became a wine guy. I'm now WSET certified, which is a highfalutin wine thing, but so quality became my passion. I wanted to understand what drives quality. And so when I started coffee, got into coffee, I didn't really know much about it, but what I knew that I wanted to do was create quality. And so that presented a bunch of problems for me at the very beginning, because number one, I got into my head I wanted to roast coffee against all the advice of some consultants that I actually even paid money for to hire and tell me what to do. And they told me not to roast, and I did it anyway. I am stubborn as well, which I think you have to be in terms of being an entrepreneur. You have to have a little bit of stubbornness in you. But I started to roast, and the model in very brief terms with coffee is coffee's still a commodity. traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And basically what happens is green buyers go off and travel the world. They buy coffees that they think that will fit the marketplace. Then they get on the phone and they start calling you. And they say, hey, we've got this great Sumatra, why don't you buy it? And so as a neophyte in the coffee business, I listened to them. And I started buying coffees from these importers. And very quickly what I realized though was what I was buying wasn't quality. And I thankfully have a good palate. And I started to taste the reality that what I was buying was not quality. And as a fundamental sort of premise as one of the driving forces of our business from day one, I knew that this wasn't gonna work, because everybody that came into my shop, all 50 of them, when I first started, most of them my friends, I kept telling them this is amazing quality, but I knew I was lying to them, right? I knew I was lying because I could taste that it wasn't, and so I started to do, again, the age of the internet, I started to go online, do some research, and I found actually an opportunity to buy some coffee off a Panamanian website. It was called the Best of Panama. And it was a coffee competition that had happened the year before, and they had all the coffee producers of Panama had competed, and they had ranked those coffees in order, and then they sold those coffees online. And I bought the 4th best coffee from Panama in 2007. And what happened next is what really changed Transcend's trajectory. Is because I had bought that coffee, the people that organized that auction thought that I knew what I was doing. They didn't really know they didn't know that I didn't. And they invited me to be a judge at the next year in 2008. So they invited me to fly to Panama and be part of an international panel of judges. There was 22 of us that spent a week tasting and evaluating the quality of coffees. And that I learned a ton doing that. It was such an amazing experience for me. But more importantly, what I did on that trip was I actually started to visit coffee producers, farmers in the mountains of Panama, and that was something that all of a sudden inspired me in a completely unexpected way to link my drive and my commitment towards quality to a much more sustainable business practice, and that was I wanted to see a linkage between the supply chain that I was dealing with, because when I got into coffee, unbeknownst to me, I discovered coffee's not an ethical business. It's a business built on the backs of the most impoverished people all across the world, and it's an exploitation business, and it is still today. For the most part, it's not a great business. And when I got involved, I was like, I didn't know this. I didn't know anything about that. And so for me, an opportunity presented itself where I could link to the producer, a local farmer, and pay for great quality and have some idea that those people were actually trickling down the prices I was paying to the workers that they were employing as well. And so that was sort of the genesis for Transcend. And none of this was really, none of it was planned. I just stumbled into it. And I think, that's one of the lessons I've learned is that I've learned that planning is a good thing, in all honesty. I spent the first 6 years of running a business without much planning, and that's where I learned some really hard lessons. But this was one of those circumstances where the lack of planning actually was a great thing, because I reacted to an opportunity, and that opportunity allowed me to sort of take hold of this business concept where we were going to do what we called relationship coffee, where we would know the producers, know the people we were working with. And so I spent the next 3 years traveling the world, meeting people, buying coffee, developing relationships, and that really has set the course for essentially what has become known as Transcend. The brand of Transcend Coffee, if nothing else, is synonymous with quality. We source some of the most expensive coffees in the world, and over the last 9 years, we've learned and honed our art in terms of executing that quality. So I just got back from Vancouver, and one of the guys from a coffee shop in Calgary, Monogram Coffee, Ben Putt, just finished, took national championship again 2 years in a row using our coffee. And we finished 3rd in the world last year. So that commitment to driving quality has really sort of propelled our brand to be something that's valuable that way. I think that sort of transitions into the next idea of being deliberate, so from the very beginning, I was deliberate about this idea of quality, and that quality was really focused firstly on the execution of what you just experienced behind the bar. So we really thought that in order to achieve the best possible quality, we have to have great baristas, and that message hasn't changed. But we, over the number of years, what we've come to realize is that deliberate focus on quality needed to be broadened, needed to be expanded, not just from an execution point of a barista, but hospitality, recognizing that this is a hospitality business, that customer service comes into play. We used to hire exclusively on the basis of, you were a coffee geek. And so, you know, the guys that would be behind the bar, you'd walk into the cafe and they'd be hiding behind the machine, watching the espresso drip out of the portafilters, you know, and sort of giggling, and they were, you know, tweaking, and they wouldn't even recognize that there was a customer standing there waiting to buy something from them. And so over the period of time, we've learned that, you know, customer service is a huge integral part of what we do. We're in a hospitality business, and while quality in the cup is intricately important, what's actually that has become a given for us. And what our business is now about is recognizing that the brand and the story and the larger experience that the customer has when they walk through our door doesn't necessarily have much to do with what's in that cup. You come back for a great tasting cup of coffee, but you would not come back if you were treated poorly. And that's really, and so I spent, as I said, 6 years basically traveling and being an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur that was scattered and you know, they call true entrepreneurs the wolves or coyotes that run down a path until the rabbit crosses the path, and then as soon as the rabbit crosses the path, we're gone and we're chasing the rabbit. And that provides for excitement, but it does not provide at all for stability within a business. And that's how Transcend operated for the first 6 years. And it's not a great way to run a business. And I had to learn that the intentionality and deliberate sort of planning and process was an absolute requirement for our business. And so I brought in a fellow named Michael Harvey, who's our ops guy. We opened just to elaborate on this point, we opened I don't know if any of you experienced the Jasper location on White Ave. Not White Ave, Jasper Ave. And the story actually happened this way. I got a phone call from the previous owner of the Jasper Ave location, or no, it was actually on an email. They sent out an email, said, hey, does anybody want to take over a cafe downtown? And that happened on a cold winter day in January. I emailed back, I'd be interested. That afternoon, I met with them. The next day, we did the deal. And I took so. And while at the time it seemed like a good idea, it was a bad idea. And it was a bad idea because I made a decision that was 100% based on gut and 100% based on this idea and this notion that I wanted to be downtown. And we had always wanted to be downtown, but I had no plan, no numbers to back up that, no understanding of what that business had been doing. They were failing, and that didn't seem to matter to me. I was just happy to be downtown. And I made a split decision that ultimately cost, you know, Transcend Coffee about $300,000. And in all fairness, if it wasn't for the graciousness of Servus, Transcend wouldn't exist. I learned a really hard lesson there after losing about $300,000 that I wasn't capable of doing the things that I was doing. I was that coyote that chased the rabbit. And while that rabbit provided interesting opportunities because it would take us around a corner that maybe we weren't planning on going around, that wasn't a good thing for business. Business is about some stability, about some projections, about planning, about execution, and I wasn't capable of doing that. And a good friend of mine said to me one day, he said, Paul, you do some amazing things, but what you don't do is run a business. And it was that I had to come to a hard realization that my skill set isn't in the operation and the execution of a business. My skill set is in networking, creating opportunities, dreaming, having a vision, but I needed someone in place to actually take reins of that business and provide some stability. And so Michael's done that in the last 3 years. And so what's been amazing to see, what's been amazing in all honesty to see in terms of transformation is a business that was known for quality, but what no one knew behind the scenes was that business was never profitable, right? It was just me or friends of mine sinking money into this business, keeping it afloat. Number one, my own stubbornness again. Number two, my own pride. It took me a year too long to close down Jasper, because I was concerned about what it would do to the image of Transcend, what it would do to my image, and that's the kind of thing that I've learned, is that you can't do it all, number one, and number two, you need that operational integrity to make a business successful. And Michael has, you know, with the addition of Michael coming online, he's taken us, you know, through planning and process and procedures, all the things I hated and I was no good at. I hated them. I just, you know, they were confinement for me. It's allowed us now to hire well, to structure, to provide clarity with roles, to provide clarity with expectations. We have a business that has no turnover. We're a hospitality business that has zero turnover. People quit when they get a job, a real job. You know, they go to university for 4 years and then they leave us. I've got 5 or 6 employees that have worked for me now for 7 years in the coffee industry, which is insanely crazy, really, in all honesty. So it's allowed us to just create a culture of stability and purpose. And we've gone through very deliberately. We hired an execution consultant 2 years ago that got us onto regular meetings. Not just strategy for the sake of strategy, but strategy with a plan and a purpose, and then helping us break that down into bite-sized pieces and actually execute. And I think that's one of the most important things that we've ever done. It's transformed our business from something that was on the edge of existence to a business now that is actually growing and is profitable. And that's a pretty big step for us. Part of the thing that Michael did when he came to us, I'm a lawyer, or I was a lawyer. Thankfully, I'm not a lawyer. Being a lawyer is, sorry for any lawyer in the room, but all my lawyer friends that are still lawyers look at me with longingness and go, "You got out, you escaped," right? And you know, I joke all the time. I do coffee tastings all the time. When I was a lawyer, I looked down the road at 25 years. I was gonna be fat, bald, and grumpy, and I'm still gonna be fat and bald, but I'm not gonna be grumpy, right? I actually enjoy the industry that I'm a part of, and it's a lot more fun. But one of the things, when Michael came on board, he came from the advertising industry in London, England, actually. He's a Brit. And he said to me, "Where's your cash flow? Where's your cash flow statement?" I'm like, "What? Right? Cash flow? Like, well, I don't even know what that is, right?" And he's like, just rolled his eyes, shakes his head, and he's like, "Dude," like, and so he started working on the cash flow, and he for a year he was absolutely in panic mode. He couldn't sleep. He was white all the time, because when he looked at the number, he's just like, "How are you still alive? Like, how are you doing this?" Right? And I just you know, you make it work. But it absolutely terrified him, because when he started to actually put things down on paper, he was like, "This is crazy." And so for me, it was a complete revelation to start actually seeing, you know, numbers on a page and seeing how we were going to manage cash flow and actually have a budget. Novel concept. Business budget. Wow, what's that? But you know, in all honesty, I think that most entrepreneurs and small business people we start off as either technicians who are very good at what we do, and we're tired of working for the man, the boss, and we can do this better, or we're passionate about something and we don't have the training or the skill set necessarily to achieve the goals and to be successful at what we're doing. It's hard because we don't have the education or the background. And that was absolutely for me. And Michael came along and you know, started to enforce, you know, cash flow statements, projecting that, budgets, you know, just all these rudimentary, you know, sort of fundamental aspects of sound financial fiscal management in business that I knew nothing about. Because in law school, they don't teach you how to run a business. You know, like, why would you do that? Like, so, you know, it really has changed the dynamics of how we operate. Cash flow for me is one of the things that is the hardest. And every time I talk to a small business owner, you say, "What's the hardest part of a business?" Cash flow. payroll for us it still is $80,000. You know, for a small business, we're $80,000 a month, and when cash flow is tight, that just becomes this huge stressor where you're just like, how am I going to pay this? How am I going to find $80,000 and keep this business going? And I think the challenge is not just the management of monthly cash flow, but then as you start to be successful and you grow, the cash flow crunch becomes even more significant, because now you have to have more cash in the bank in order to bring in more supply, more inventory, and the numbers just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think most businesses fail not because of necessarily poor management, because they can't handle growth. They get into a situation where they're scrambling to understand, how do we manage this growth? How do I pay for that last shipment? Like I just ordered some coffee brewers, these silver coffee brewers from Holland. They're amazing coffee brewers. We're the national distributor. We've been the national distributor for those coffee brewers for the last 8 years. You know, we're now selling, you know, instead of ordering 100 or 200 at a time, I'm now ordering 700, 800. And so my bill is now 90,000 euros, right? 90,000 euros. And I'm sitting on that inventory for 4 months, right? Or 3 months. And so you all of a sudden go, I've got to come up with $170,000 to pay for this shipment, right? So cash flow for me is the biggest issue for small business. And I think it's the thing that we need to, it's where we need the most work. The other thing I've learned, and I learned the hard way, and I think this is a good lesson to learn, is when I first started, there's no money, right? Like I said, when I first started Transcend, I was the roaster, I was the barista, I was running the till, I was the very inept bookkeeper, and there was no money coming through the door. My 50 friends would come through out of pity to buy coffee from me, and I didn't pay myself for 3 years. And why? Because I couldn't afford to pay myself, right? So thankfully my wife had a pretty good job as a consultant, and she kept us alive. But when I came knocking at a financial institution and said, hey, I could use some help here, the first thing they ask you for is, well, I need the last 2 years of your income tax statements. Where's your T4s? And I'm like, I don't have a T4. I haven't worked for 2 years. And what I've learned is that no matter how hard it is, you pay yourself first, pay your taxes, and then give every dime back to the business. But at least you've got a tax return at the end of the year, so that when the banker goes, where's your T4, you at least have something to show them. And you can show them that you have the ability to actually, you know, back up that personal guarantee that they're asking you to sign, right? So it's impossible to get financing as a small business if you do not have an income. And I think it's the biggest mistake that most small businesses make as they start off, is they don't pay themselves because they can't afford it. But what they have to do is pay themselves, take the lump of taxes and give the money back to the business, right? You can get it later, get it shareholder loan. I think two sort of takeaways for me is know your product, know what your business is about. And quality has been the thing that has driven Transcend forward. But at the end of the day, while that was very clear to me, it wasn't clear to my market necessarily, to the marketplace, and it wasn't even clear to the people that worked for me, because I wasn't very good at communicating what those drivers were from in here to both my employees, so they could understand what was driving us forward, or even telling our story to our consumer base. And it's been 9 years, we've just gone through a brand refresh. I've spent some money, hired a great marketing gal who's been a long-time customer of Transcend, and she's actually helped us articulate what our story is and what drives us forward in a way that we can now go out to the marketplace and we can tell our story in a much more effective way. And I think, I'm thankful that we remain true to that. It's so easy to compromise. It's so easy. I buy all of our coffee in US dollars. So, I don't know if you follow the US currency market, but the last year, our costs have gone up 30%. It's not fun. It's not fun to watch the dollar just chip away from to par to 75 cents, right? It's brutal. And it's so easy in that kind of environment to go, you know what? We have to compromise. We can't afford to keep doing what we're doing. But the reality is, the market price for coffee is about $1.10 a pound right now. Our average price per pound, in terms of our cost of goods, is $4.60, $4.70. We're paying 3 to 4 times market price because we care about quality, and it's something that we've remained consistently focused on. Is we can't compromise quality because our brand is quality, and if we start giving people substandard quality, we're worth nothing. And then I think the other thing is that I've learned the hard way, and it goes back to what I said a little bit earlier, is know what you can do and what you can't do. And the reality is, if you're working in your business, you have no time to work on your business. And I think that's the biggest trap for small business is you are the technician, you're the bookkeeper, you're the marketer, and your life is consumed working inside of your business. And you never have time to pop your head out and take a look around and go, where are we? Where are we going? And the last 2 years for me, I don't make coffee. I'm not allowed back here, right? I'm not allowed to make coffee because I'm not good enough. I've ceased to be good enough for years. I don't roast coffee anymore. I don't buy. I used to travel the world buying coffee. I passed that off to Josh, one of the guys that made you coffee today. He's single. I've got a 10-year-old, 12-year-old. Josh loves traveling. And it was hard to start with, where I was willing to say, okay, you know what, I trust you. And trust means I know you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things wrong, but you care enough about this business, and I trust you, and you're going to take ownership of this. And I think it's the best decision I've made in the last 2 years, where I've pulled myself out of the day-to-day operations of this business. I've handed off that stuff to people that I trust and know that are competent, and it's allowed me to step back and go, okay, where are we going? How do we get there? How do we plan for the future? And I think it's the biggest lesson I've learned in the last 3 years is, if you're working in your business, you're not working on your business. And that's something that's been so transformative for Transcend, is me not being in the day-to-day operations anymore, right? It's not that I don't work hard, I do, and a lot of my staff don't think I work at all. I'm working, at 10 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, but the reality is I'm working on my business, not in my business, and it's made all the difference, actually. I think I'll wrap it up there, and you guys can ask some questions.